Namaste all, welcome. My name is Ankur Patel. I'm the Director of Advancement for Hindu University of America. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for this webinar on equating Hinduism and caste, California versus Cisco Systems. We were on a short break from these weekly Saturday webinars as we just launched the new quarter. And I'm glad to say we have over 480 course registrations across 24 courses. But we're here to discuss the latest case in the systematic effort to marginalize, disrespect, and trivialize Hinduism. And the West has been doing this for centuries with simplified false narratives depicting us Hindus as tribal, superstitious, hierarchical, oppressive, and they almost always use caste as a point of irredeemable criticism. This is our third webinar on caste, and I'd just like to say that the global white supremacist caste system puts us near the bottom of their understanding of racial and cultural hierarchy. And this lawsuit by the state of California against Cisco Systems is the latest, most egregious attack on Hinduism. So we're glad to have Shri Suhag Shukla Esquire joining us today to discuss this important issue. Suhag ji is the co-founder of Hindu American Foundation and the current executive director. She holds a BA in religion and a JD from the University of Florida. Ms. Shukla has helped steer the Foundation, HAF, to being recognized as a leading voice for civil rights, human rights, and religious freedom. She's been instrumental in the development of a broad range of educational materials and position papers, blogs, for a variety of platforms. Ms. Shukla has served on the board of the Nirvana Center, Mainline Indian Association, and the YWCA of Minneapolis. She was also a member of the Department of Homeland Security Faith-Based Security and Communications Subcommittee. Shri Shukla ji is a member of the board for the National Museum of American Religion and serves on the religious advisory committees for the Council on Foreign Relations, the Humane Society of the United States, the Department of Homeland Security Subcommittee for the Prevention of Targeted Violence Against Faith-Based Communities, is a member of the First Amendment Center's Committee on Religious Liberty and the United Nations Women's Gender Equality and Religious Platform. I could go on, but let's get started. Let me hand it over to Shri Kalyan Vishwanathan, the president of HUA, who will give us some context. Kalyanji, it's always a pleasure to have you. I'm excited about this webinar. Take it away, Kalyanji.
Great, great, Ankur. Thanks a lot. And for everybody on the webinar, I just want all of you to know, Ankur is recovering from COVID-19, as we speak.
Wow.
So I'm I wasn't sure if he'd be able to make this webinar, but he did. I'm very glad that he's continuing to participate in the midst of his own personal COVID-19 situation. I want to kick this off in a certain way. At HUA, we are committed to a continuing and ongoing dialogue on this vexing topic of caste, with which Hindus are constantly placed on the defensive. And we have to find our own voice in this space. But today's conversation, I want to say a little bit about what it is not. Okay. So today's conversation is not a conversation about what is caste. It is not about should it be there, should it be abolished. So who will abolish it? Is it a problem? Is it not a problem? We're not, in that sense, we're not going to litigate caste itself as a phenomenon. Okay, so just kindly for everybody, I just wanted to mention that. So then, in that case, what is this about? Well, it is about a specific event or a series of events that is unfolding in California, which is fairly serious and egregious, meaning it has consequences for the Hindu community. And we want to understand the full scope and potential of this event to disrupt the Hindu community in North America in some fundamental ways, and the nature of the intervention that the Hindu American Foundation is spearheading through their legal brief. Okay, so with that brief setup, I'd like to hand it over to Suhag Shukla. Suhaji, thank you very much. I look forward to many more conversations in the future with you, but kick this off today.
Absolutely. Namaste, everyone. Thank you, HUA, for hosting this very important conversation that really affects every single one of us, especially Hindus and people of Indian origin in the United States. Thank you, Kalyan, for immediately reaching out and making this happen. Ankur, for all that you do on the back end and on social media, and I'm glad to hear that you're on the mend. I will just quickly share my screen and put this in presentation mode. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So for those who may not be familiar with the Hindu American Foundation, the Hindu American Foundation is an advocacy organization that works to educate the public about Hindus and Hinduism and advocate for policies that promote the well-being of not just Hindus in the United States, but Hindus around the world, as well as all people and the planet. The variety of issues that we have advocated for range from human rights, such as highlighting human rights atrocities against Hindu minorities in places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and a number of other countries, as well as fighting for our rights right here at home in the United States. When we're talking about human rights in the United States, it's more referred to as civil rights. And that's what today's conversation is about. So for the next 20 to 30 minutes, I might go longer, but what I want to do is just first cover what has happened, why is California in court, and why are they suing Cisco, and more importantly, why is HAF trying to get their foot in the door as well. I'll go a little bit over some just very high-level constitutional law principles that we believe have been violated by the state of California. I'll go into what's at stake, on a variety of fronts for our community, and share some resources at the end, and then hopefully we can have a Q&A. And I know that this topic evokes a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and so in our limited time, we'll do the best that we can to get to everyone. But this is not a one and done conversation. It's obviously something that needs to be ongoing for our community. But as Ankur rightly said, caste is one of the most misunderstood and complicated topics. And yet it's become the predominant means by which not only Hindu and Hinduism is known, but also India and Indians. And so even if you are not a Hindu, but if your skin is brown, you are going to be implicated by the predominant narrative that is largely inaccurate. So first, I want to quickly go over what happened. So the first thing is that the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing sued Silicon Valley tech giant Cisco Systems in June of 2020. The first case that they filed, the first complaint rather, was filed in federal court. But then we've been monitoring this since June because the state, for whatever reason, it's rather unusual, put a huge media blitz around this particular case. So whether it was for political reasons or they feel that they're making some sort of historic statement about filing one of the most high profile caste cases, we don't know, but certainly one can speculate. After kind of a quiet period, we saw a second line of, quiet period on California's front, not on the media front, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But in October, we saw a second press release from the state in which they had withdrawn the case from federal court and refiled it in California state court. Now, one of the things that concern us is that California is known for having activist judges. So where some of these constitutional claims would have been, in our opinion, very clear cut, that in California, the challenge is a little bit more uphill. So what exactly is Cisco in court over? California, or rather California, the California Department, and I'm just going to, for shorthand, refer to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing now as the state of California. The state of California is alleging that Cisco did not do enough about a claim by an individual, John Doe, who is of Indian origin and claims to be Dalit, that Cisco did not do enough for a claim of harassment and discrimination that he alleged against 2 other employees of Indian origin. Cisco is rejecting this claim of discrimination and have said that they did all that was required of them, not only by law, but by their internal policy and whatever mechanism they have to look into any complaints about alleged discrimination. And they are also, I think, holding out for arbitration, which is something that apparently all employees that sign a contract with Cisco are mandated to do. Now, let me just give you a little bit more detail on the facts. And the facts, I will, we kind of sometimes jokingly hear, well, these are our facts and these are their facts. And literally, this is what I will be presenting, because the facts that we have access to are presented partially by the state of California and partially from an internal blog from Cisco Systems. So what we understand is that John Doe was actually hired by one of the named defendants. Remember, the 2 defendants, in addition to Cisco, are 2 individuals of Indian origin. So one of those Indian managers apparently went to school with John Doe. They both were students at IIT and hired John Doe. So what John Doe is claiming is that the manager, either prior to him joining Cisco or sometime thereafter, mentioned something about John Doe not being on the main list. Now, for those of you who have gone to school in India and are aware of India's reservation system, this may not sound unfamiliar, but for those of us who are not who didn't grow up or go to school in India, what that means is that the implication is that the person got into the university based on a reservation seat, which is India's kind of affirmative action program that reserves a certain percentage of seats in public education and in government and in state jobs for people who are designated as either a scheduled caste, an other backward class, or a scheduled tribe. So what Cisco is saying is that John Doe was given all the opportunities by these managers, that he was given increasingly greater challenges so that they could support his growth. John Doe is saying that that did not happen. So just to be clear, HAF is not taking any sort of position on the facts because one, we don't have standing, but second, we just are not privy to what actually happened. So I want to go a little bit into exactly what California is claiming. What California is claiming is not, it goes well beyond trying to seek justice for someone who believes that they were wronged on some characteristic that is not necessarily in their control. But in order to do that, what California is doing is it's perpetuating a number of false, dangerous, and racist stereotypes about Hinduism and Hindus. So the quotes that you see right now on your screen are directly from the complaint. Notice how caste is described. It's described as a strict social and religious hierarchy. You will see that caste is then later conflated with things like race and color and with religion. You also see kind of the trope of skin color becoming conflated with caste, which many of you who have probably taken the HU courses or should be registering for them, especially one that's upcoming on on race, we know that those are rooted in theories that have been debunked, like the Aryan invasion theory. Notice also that it says that untouchability is something that is mandated by both social custom and legal mandate. So what basically the state has done is they've avoided actually defining what caste is. Now, Kalyan mentioned earlier that, we're not going to be talking about what caste is, but I think it's important for us to understand that outside of the administrative designation under Indian law, and I talked about SC, OBC, and ST, that there is no universally accepted definition amongst historians, amongst sociologists, anthropologists, or other scholars on exactly what caste is. Whatever definitions there have been, and there's multiple, generally fail on when they're trying to find empirical support for a definition. A definition has to have, whatever elements are part of a definition have to be true in every case for it to be an accurate definition. And that's simply not the case with caste. The other thing that California has done is they've blown a dog whistle and for anti-immigrant bigotry. Now, California, as many of you know, some of you may live in California, is actually well reputed for being a progressive state. California is often ahead of the game in terms of, providing adequate family leave or maternity leave and other sorts of programs that are really supportive of kind of, positive protections for workers. Yet here you see kind of language that you wouldn't really expect in a complaint being filed by a state that's supposed to be progressive like California. You'd expect to see them, and you do see them on anti-immigrant blogs or from think tanks who are not pro-immigration. So this to us, and especially for a state like California that seems to be attacking the tech industry, then the California economy depends on this tech industry. So this is to us something that really caught our attention. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it didn't just catch our attention. It's caught the attention of others that we probably wouldn't want to be paying attention to this. The third kind of challenge with this particular complaint is that in order to first prove this notion that somehow caste discrimination is widespread, first they use kind of these anti-immigrant tropes of saying that, oh, Cisco is overrepresented by South Asians, as if they didn't have the merit to get the jobs that they did and to be able to grow within those companies. But they also have relied on a survey that was conducted in 2018 by an entity called Equality Labs. Now, Equality Labs, for all intents and purposes, I think there's only one simple way to describe them, and that is that it's an anti-Hindu hate group. And the reason I say this, and I don't use that terminology lightly, is not just based on their social media presence, which has perpetuated some pretty hateful remarks about Hindus and Hinduism, but they deny the very existence of Dalit Hindus. If you look at their website and you see who are they trying to advocate for, you will not find the word Hindu there. And as we know, Hindu Dalits are very much a part of Hindu society, and people who would have, in the stereotypical sense of what we know as caste, people who have come from, say, what today we would consider Dalit communities, are amongst some of the most revered spiritual figures within the tradition. So this survey that they put out in 2018, aside from just kind of taking surveys from the same ecosystem and making a number of errors in terms of how they define caste and how they conflate it with Hindu teachings, there's a number of scientific errors. So it's not a scientific survey. A scientific survey is, you need to have a methodology, you have to have a statistical analysis, you have to have a sampling size that's going to bolster whatever findings you make, and you have to ensure that confirmation bias errors are not being made. None of that would stand any sort of test if you really look at this particular survey, because it's a politically motivated survey. A little bit more history about Equality Labs is that, this entity has been active for a number of years. In California, their allies testified that Hinduism is an evil social construct. That was in official public testimony. Their activists heckled and bullied young Hindu children and parents who were peacefully waiting in line, waiting their turn to testify about the inaccuracies and stereotypes that were being perpetuated in California textbooks. And they have a track record of even attacking Hindu holidays. So that's a real problem when California, in the absence of any other scientific reliable data, relies on a politically motivated survey in order to kind of bolster its case. I think is deeply problematic. One other thing that I'll mention is that they are continuing to solicit examples of discrimination in tech, in the tech industry and beyond, because Cisco is just the first step. I don't think that we can underestimate the motivation that they have to continue pushing cases to other companies. Now, here are two problems with even the way that they're asking questions. They are giving as examples some of the most basic exchanges that you might have amongst members of the Hindu community. Things like, oh, do you take your child to Bal Vihar class? Or, are you vegetarian? Or, will you be celebrating Janmashtami? These are the types of questions that are being framed as somehow discriminatory or trying to get to the root of someone's caste and then adding some sort of status to it. In one petition, they even asked people to lie about what zip code they were reporting these alleged discrimination, acts of discrimination from. So they had provided an actual Bay Area zip code, obviously to inflate the numbers of a problem that they are trying to present as being widespread. So as I said in the beginning, HAF has filed what's called a motion to intervene as an interested third party. So before I go into the basis for our complaint, I just want to give kind of a high-level overview on the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are called or referred to as the Bill of Rights. And these include things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, press, freedom to bear arms, and a whole slew of rights that we as individual citizens have, especially in relation to how the government enforces or creates laws. The 14th Amendment basically incorporated the Bill of Rights and made them applicable to all states. Prior to that,
Suhag, 1 second.
yeah, yes.
I'm just wondering where that disturbance, the noise is coming from. Can't possibly be coming from the audience. Are you hearing the noise that I'm hearing?
I'm not hearing any noise. Are
You're
you
not
hearing it still?
Yeah. Okay. So I was, but please do continue, and
Okay.
let's see if it's gonna go away.
Okay. It might have been my paper.
Okay. Yeah, the paper probably.
Okay. So I'll be a little bit more gentle.
Okay. Perfect. That's good. Awesome.
This is really just to keep me on time, because as a lawyer, we're accustomed to being paid by the word, not in the nonprofit world, but sometimes I have a tendency to get wordy. So sorry about that if that disturbed. So the first thing is a First Amendment claim. What does the First Amendment of the US Constitution provide? One of those freedoms is religious freedom. So the First Amendment is kind of two-pronged. First, it's a restraint on government power, as well as it conferring rights to us as citizens. The 14th Amendment is what is referred to generally as due process and equal protection. So what due process is generally kind of, if you want to think of it in a big picture, it's about fairness and justice. That is the way that the government is conducting itself through its laws, in how they're created, how they're written, and how they're executed. Is it fair and just? And the ways in which the due process kind of comes up in our day-to-day lives are procedural protections. So, if someone is arrested, what requirements are there for the state to give them notice? What rights have to be read? All of that falls under due process. Individual rights, like the Bill of Rights, that all comes under due process, as does substantive due process, which is a more general catch-all. Things like right to privacy, right to marriage, all these things have kind of come under that purview. The other aspect of the 14th Amendment is equal protection, that the government must legislate in a way that's impartial. They must have laws, or whatever actions they take must be impartial. I'm hoping that this kind of overview gives you an idea, and you know where I'm going to be going next in terms of what is HAF's claim, in terms of what the state of California has done. Think back to that first slide that I showed you. How did the state of California define the caste system? They defined it as a Hindu social and religious hierarchy, one that was that imposed untouchability by both social and legal mandates. So first and foremost, set aside the fact that they have this completely wrong. The number one problem with what the state of California has done is it has absolutely zero right to define Hindu doctrine. Now, I know people will say, well, Hinduism is not a non-doctrinal religion. Yes, that's absolutely true. But we can think of religious doctrine as essentially the inner workings of a religious tradition. And that is where the state of California has overstepped by trying to define Hinduism as having inherently a hierarchical caste system that requires each and every one of us, as a matter of our religious practice and religious beliefs, to discriminate against others. The second aspect of our legal claim is due process and equal protection. So by California claiming that the caste system is a social and religious hierarchy, and that untouchability is legally mandated, it's asking that Hindus be religiously and ethnically profiled for bigotry. So this is neither just nor fair. Not only that, but I talked earlier about the fact that California has actually not provided a definition of what caste is. It hasn't provided a workable method or any sort of standards by which the company or the state would determine what someone's caste was. And so what that does is it endangers Hindus to unequal treatment. That first of all, there's a presumption of guilt rather than non-guilt. The American system provides people who are accused of anything a presumption of innocence. But in this particular, the way in which that they've defined it and gone about their complaint, they are basically asking companies to presume guilt of all Indian and Hindu workers. There's also a presumption of the perpetrator's religion and ethnicity. So what does this do? It perversely will lead to the targeting of an increased discrimination against workers of Indian origin, particularly Hindu workers. Now let's imagine the worst case scenario if this case goes ahead. What are Hindu workers and companies, what's that relationship going to look like? Are we going to have extra boxes that we have to fill on our employment forms that indicate what caste we are? Are we supposed to line up, as one scholar activist has suggested? On NPR, an activist scholar named Suraj was interviewed. He suggested, and without any sort of critical question follow-up, partially because this whole narrative about the caste and Hinduism equation is so ingrained that people can't even think critically when they're outside of the system, or outside of rather the community. He suggested that companies send him a list of workers of Indian origin, and he would help tabulate what caste they were. This does not even take into account what a second, like myself, born and raised here, what a second, my children, third generation or even fourth generation, are we supposed to constantly have to have an additional layer of vetting simply because we are Indian or Hindu? That is what this case could possibly lend to. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the other unintended consequences. So the relief that we're asking for is that California declare that, that the court declare that the state of California and the department has violated our First Amendment and due process rights. We are also, there's a California state law that similarly protects against state intrusion on the civil rights of Californians. So we are also making a claim under that law. And we want to enjoin. What that means is we want to stop California from engaging in this practice of interfering in the interreligious workings of our community, and enjoin them from bringing this sort of case in its current state. So what's at stake? I talked a little bit about what additional procedural headaches that might come with if all of a sudden this case goes through successfully. That they should add caste as some sort of category into their HR policies, that there might be additional hurdles that Hindus would be required to jump over, let alone the fact that that also is now opening up companies to the to susceptibility of additional discrimination cases. Because if I'm required to fill out a box that others are not, why shouldn't I sue the company and the state for religious discrimination? So that's a problem. All Hindus, is the way that they have defined caste, are now going to be suspect in the eyes of the law. Overall, why would a company want to take on the additional HR headache of having to police this one community who seems to have a form of discrimination that is so unique and so different from any other form of discrimination that we see in every human civilization? Why would they want to hire Indians? Why would they want to promote them if they feel or fear that there might be additional hurdles for them to overcome? And the other aspect of the process is that, are we to now expect that the only place where caste actually has any sort of legal force is in India? So are we as Americans, or even if you're not a US citizen, are we as workers in the United States now going to have to be under the guidance of Indian law? And are courts in the United States and companies going to keep track of? As we know, in India, there's constant changes to people lobbying to get on the list or off the list, having their designations changed. So how are American companies supposed to keep up with all of that? We've also seen that caste is being pushed on college campuses. Brandeis University has already added caste as a category in their non-discrimination policies. One of the administrators in a PR story that covered the story actually admitted to the fact that they have had there's no evidence of caste-based discrimination having happened on campus, yet they felt the need to add it as if it's something unique and can't already be covered if there's such an instance under their existing policies. The problem with the conflation of caste in schools is well known. We know that from a bullying survey that we conducted maybe 6 years ago, we found that there was already 77% of students who were surveyed had reported that there was a curricular focus on caste. And 34% of the students that we surveyed felt that they were bullied for their Hindu faith. we ended up doing a secondary analysis to see, is there a correlation between the focus on caste in a classroom as well as perceptions of being bullied. And what we found in our secondary analysis was that there was there was strong evidence for a direct correlation between the intensity with which the school's Hinduism unit focused on caste and the likelihood that both the child perceived that Hinduism had been taught negatively and that he or she were bullied on the basis of their faith. So what happens? Then we talked about what happens in the workplace, on college campuses, and in schools. Say you're retired. Say you're not working, you're at home. Say you don't have any children. Why should you really care about this? Well, because it also affects the general perception of who we are as a people. California has, as I mentioned earlier, invested heavily in the PR, which we, as I said, think that maybe there's political reasons for it. So we already know that there's stereotypes out there. This just allows certain activist circles and scholars to re-perpetuate and have kind of the authority of a legal claim validate these stereotypes. So this particular quote that you see on the screen is from a story on the Cisco lawsuit that appeared on Vice News. And the person quoted here is a law professor at a law school in Indiana. Not only does he repeat an outright erroneous and false stereotype, but he also erases the unique experience of Hindu Americans experience by conflating it with whatever's happening on the ground in India. We've also seen on the media front that this particular case has brought the haters out of the woodwork. These comments, these are quotes, and these are some of, not even some of the worst ones. Breitbart also covered the lawsuit that the state filed against Cisco. And these are the types of anti-Hindu and anti-immigrant statements that came out amongst the comments. So as I said earlier, you wouldn't expect the state of California, this is what I mean by dog whistle, that directly as a result of how California has framed its complaint, you can see who they ended up feeling like they were being spoken to. What does all of this mean? Perhaps you are, confident in your identity. Many of us are grounded in our tradition, and the beauty of our tradition is that it does give us the equanimity to stand up to stereotypes. It gives us that internal fortitude and strength. But the fact of the matter is that that group of people I would put in the camp of fewer. And the majority of people, there are documented scientific evidence to show that prejudice and stereotypes have a long-term impact, not just on adults, but children. So recent studies looking at the exposure of prejudice and stereotypes in adults have found that immediately after having been exposed to prejudicial comments, they were asked to do certain tasks. They showed an increase in aggressive behavior after being, put under this test of stereotypes, a decrease in self-control, a decrease in the ability of making good decisions, good rational decisions, as well as an increase in indulgence of unhealthy food. So what this ends up doing is, if companies say incorporate a false understanding of what this is, and just to kind of join the PC wagon, incorporate caste into their policies, or if the state is successful, it creates kind of a vicious feedback loop that if you're in a circumstance where you feel bullied, how are you supposed to bring your best foot forward? So there are real detrimental impacts to not just us mentally, but in our ability to actually continue contributing to our companies. And something that's really been kind of one of the key positive contributions that we have been able to make as a community. In children, cultural racism manifests with poor mental health outcomes, both social and cognitive development issues, as well as depression and self-harm, some of you may be familiar with like self-mutilation, where kids will hurt themselves and cut, to the worst case of suicide. And it also has the poor or negative outcomes, or negative impact rather, on their physical outcomes. Allostatic load is basically the wear and tear on your body, your immune system, inflammatory and chronic disease biomarkers. We know that all of these things are adversely impacted by stress. Yoga is kind of our key to addressing that. But when children are young, they're really thrown into kind of a crisis of identity as a result of these types of stereotypes. I want to just end here before we open up for a discussion and questions. But I want to be very clear about HAF's position on quote unquote caste, that we vehemently oppose. And I think that what I say here, I would imagine that everyone on this call would agree with, because what I'm about to say is grounded in the tradition and the teachings of Dharma, and of our responsibility for ahimsa, to our responsibility of seva, and our responsibility for satya. But we vehemently oppose all forms of prejudice and discrimination, regardless of whether it's prohibited by policy or law. We also reject any claim that prejudice and discrimination based on caste are inherent to Hinduism. And in fact, we find that the solution to social prejudice and discrimination in core Hindu teachings, such as the teachings of oneness, will provide us a pathway forward to ensure that all people can live with mutual respect and dignity. I just want to point out a few educational resources. What these educational resources are, they encompass the things that we won't be bringing up in our legal claim, largely because the judge, just like California, shouldn't be interfering in our religious doctrine. In that same way, a judge in California shouldn't be determining what caste is, what the definition is, what the history is. But it's important for our own community, because we too are kind of imprisoned by a predominant narrative that's rooted in racist colonial stereotypes. So if you were educated in India in an English education system, you grew up with sometimes the same stereotypes that we've grown up with here in the United States. So one of those resources is called the Caste Conundrum. If you're interested, you can learn about what are the different ways in which people have grappled with the concept of caste, and what are the struggles in trying to find a definition. We also kind of clarify Indian concepts like Varna and Jati that have been misconflated with this concept of caste. This next resource is the Racist History of the Caste System. This is a place of existing, emerging, and much needed scholarship. I know many of the scholars who are on faculty at HUA are delving into these, to this particular history of how is the predominant narrative of Hinduism today, how has it been shaped by the European experience of Indians in India. And so this is not meant to be a thorough investigation, but it's actually an introduction to those who are interested to learn about the scholarly work that is being done.
So, just one quick interruption.
Yes, sure.
Go to the previous page, if you could, please.
You want me to go back? Sure.
Yeah, the previous.
Oops, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, see, in this, the title says the racist history of the caste system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's important for our audience to distinguish between the racist history of the narrative, the caste system narrative, from the phenomenon that we have experienced, whether in India or elsewhere. So they are two different things. And one of the places where there is enormous confusion is the narrative has become the thing, in large measure, and that narrative has a racist origin from a particular European experience, as well as a particular European intellectual process that got overlaid on India. So I just wanted to make sure that people
Absolutely.
get that
I'll,
distinction.
yeah, no, I'll just, in some sense, this title was intentionally written that way because it's clickbait, right? Because in the sense that there are people within the community who are very aware of this, but there are more people who believe that the caste system is a racist system, as opposed to the caste system is rooted in a racist narrative about Indians, right? So I'm glad that you clarified it for the participants, but uh, there was kind of a intentionality in terms of, those are the audiences we have to reach so that they can understand, and within our own who may just not know for so long. And this, by the way, this is not to deny the fact that discrimination and prejudice don't exist in Indian society. We're human. Discrimination and prejudice exists in every human society. But unless we're able to unpack this kind of framework that's been placed upon our own understanding and the broader understanding of who we are and what society is made of, what it's driven by, if we don't get to the root causes, there's no hope of abolishing any sort of mistreatment. So, but thank you for pointing that out. The second to last resource that I'll point out is the influence of Varna on personality. Oh, I noticed a typo. A person on personality assessments. So Carl Jung was deeply influenced by this whole notion of Varna, and his work on personalities and pathways to knowledge ultimately actually influenced two women, Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. Many of you may have heard of the Myers-Briggs test. This is a test which ironically are used in high schools, on college campuses, as well as in corporate America, for people to see what aptitudes they have, what skill sets do they have to bring their best person forward and contribute to something greater than themselves. So this is just getting people to start understanding of what Varna actually is and what it's been misconstrued to. And the last thing I'll highlight are these statements of oneness that we're too often forced into defending what Hinduism isn't, rather than talking about what Hinduism is. So we've been fortunate to gather reflections from a number of leading spiritual leaders that are based in the United States, talking about the Hindu teaching of oneness. I mean, this is such a profound teaching that and you will find it in any sampradaya, any school of thought. And this herein lies where the solution is, not just for our own community, but for humanity to work through prejudice and discrimination, and even climate change and other issues, because it goes beyond, it transcends humanity to all of existence. So with that, Kalyan, we can kick off a conversation or whatever's next.
Okay, terrific, terrific. Suhag, thank you so much for your presentation. Now, I want to encourage everybody to put your questions into the Q&A box, okay? And, if you have a comment, you put your comments in the chat window, so we're going to only address questions from the Q&A box, okay? So with that, let me take one question.
I can, let me stop the screen share maybe.
Yeah,
that
I think,
way.
yeah, perhaps, yeah, that's good.
Okay,
That's good, right.
perfect.
So, this is my question to you.
Uh-huh.
That, ordinarily, an isolated case of discrimination between a manager and a subordinate would be handled as a specific instance of discrimination, even if it was a demonstrable discrimination, and Cisco would handle it within the framework of, say, for example, their own HR policies pertaining to discrimination and violation of employee rights and so on and so forth. Now, what is extraordinarily strange about this case is that instead of the discriminated employee suing his boss or his company, the state of California is suing Cisco. It's an extraordinarily strange phenomenon because generally it is not the state's role to get into how companies manage their internal matters. So how would you
Yeah, let me,
understand?
that's a good question.
Mm,
And so there's multiple paths by which you can pursue alleged discrimination by an employer. Most states require that in addition, once you have exhausted the internal HR process for getting some sort of resolution, the next step is that you file with the EEOC, right? So this department is essentially the state EEOC, which is the Equal Employment and Opportunity Commission. Then if the EEOC or whatever that government body is finds that the state, that the company, that maybe there is something here and the company did fail to address it, then the state will sue a company. But so that in and of itself is not unusual. But the media blitz, I mean, this was on Westlaw and Reuters, and I mean, it made international news. That is quite unusual. For this to what the motivations behind that is, I think, remains to be seen, but that to me raises eyebrows.
So clearly, there are vested interests behind taking an instance,
Yeah.
and framing an entire community. After all, it is. I have worked with people in my job with people arguably from different communities, different jatis, and so on. And it's not uncommon for all of us to be thrown together in our workplaces and environments today. And there are millions, and one could say even billions of instances where different jatis and communities participate together without an explicit experience of discrimination. So the isolated incident of discrimination being used to stereotype and paint the whole community, ignoring the millions and millions of incidents when there is no discrimination, okay, which nobody documents, by the way, because that's how it is supposed to be, that we, no matter which jati we belong to, we do not discriminate. In other words, even if we map jati to caste, it's one thing to belong to a caste. It's another thing entirely to discriminate on the basis of caste. And so this point, how do we raise this point with the state of California? And are we adequately doing that in your own brief?
Well, I think there's a lot of presumptions there that, if I'm understanding what you're saying, I'll just say that, just this, it goes back to the stereotype that there's a pan-Indian hierarchy in which one group is always on top and the rest are at the bottom. I, as a second generation Hindu American, and some of your audience members who have been to an HF program or have heard me talk have probably remember or know that I oftentimes share that it wasn't until 9th grade world history that I went home to ask my parents what our caste was, because my world history teacher, of course, presumed that I would know, that it would be a central part of my identity, and that then on top of that, that I would know what that meant in terms of where our social standing was. So there's a lot of presumptions here, even before we get to what you're asking, is that can we expect that, multi-generational Indians are going to know what their identity is? Can we expect that someone who, has roots in Andhra Pradesh, for instance, knows what, even if someone were to share like, oh, we're from this community and they're Gujarati, are they even speaking in the same language, right? In that sense, literally and figuratively. So I think even before we get to that question, this presumption that somehow we all identify by a caste, that we somehow all know where we then stand on this one big, huge billion-person pyramid and know, oh, by the way, oh, I'm higher than you, so now I'm going to be crappy to you. Like all those presumptions are so patronizing
Yeah.
and racist, and that's what California is doing.
Yeah. So here is another question that I picked up from one of the chat window here. So there was a survey apparently done by Equality Law Labs, which has become sort of the data,
Mhm.
that is driving a lot of this activity. And clearly, they're an activist group. They want to. I mean, you know, you can establish whatever data you want by selectively asking questions, and
Right.
depending on who you ask and who you don't ask, and so on. Now, the question is, would HAF be interested in sponsoring another survey of your own? And there's a lot of people asking, how can we help? How can we participate? How can we contribute? What can we do? And I think, as a Hindu community, we often end up in this place. What can I do? What can I do? How can I help? And then it's sort of frustrating because, can we donate money? I mean, is that all we can do? What else can we do? So,
Certainly people can do that. But
yeah,
in terms of what people can do, I think one is first just begin to do the study on this
yeah,
topic,
right.
right?
Mm,
You all are offering amazing courses. I just shared some resources that are a start to so that we are armed with our own history. And again, it's still an emerging and much needed area of research. So that's one thing. Yes, lawsuits cost money. So, if people are willing to support, that's always helpful. I would say collectively, I've lost track of how many hours we've had. At least 3 staff members. We have 13 full-time staff members, but 3 who have been working on this and have set aside a number of other priorities to just work on this. I think if I mention Cast to a Seam one more time, I think his head's going to blow up because it's just been, single-minded focus on this topic. But I think that I would say people should be on the lookout because I know that there are community organizations and leaders in California who are trying to get kind of collective support. I don't know what that's going to end up looking like, but if you're active in any organizations, I'm sure you'll find out. The question of a survey, it has been brought up a number of times, and I think that any sort of survey, I think it's important for us to just do a survey period on Hindu American identity. How is that changing across generations? So I would hesitate to do one just on caste identity because in some sense you are then injecting a consciousness over a concept that is otherwise reducing relevance or not relevant, or where it is relevant, where community identity or community affiliation might come up in the context of marriage or certain celebrations and things like that. I think a larger survey is important for us to do, and I know at least 1 or 2 people in our community who are within our circles who has expertise in psychometry or psychometry, however you pronounce it. So I think that's definitely in the next 2 years, we need to think about doing something like that because it's important.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's possible we could do it even sooner and maybe raise some funds, targeted funds, just to do a survey so that
Yeah.
there can be a counter. See, when the whole case is resting on some made-up data or partially constructed data, the only thing that can possibly contest it is some other kind of data that is reliably and
Yeah.
meticulously produced. And I just wonder if the data, what role it will play in terms of the claims that the state of California is making.
Right. I'm hoping that we nip this even before then, right? Because
Before-
if you just focus in on the facts of the case and try to look at existing law and find a way to remedy whatever injustice he faced, if he did face any sort of injustice, then whether something is prevalent or not, whether we need to perpetuate stereotypes or not, whether we need to intrude in our religious freedom, all that is off the table. But at the same time, I think we were talking earlier and you said, you can't ask questions like, so when did you stop beating your pet or your spouse or whatever, right? Like, obviously, those types of questions, which I would say that some of the survey, those questions may have been in that format. That's why I would say that while it's urgent, it really should be thought out very thoroughly and designed in a scientific manner.
Yeah. So, so there's a question here. They're asking how is HUA intervening? Actually, HUA is not intervening in the case. HAF is intervening. Hindu American Foundation is intervening. And Suhag, can you clearly articulate what is your HAF's intervention in this matter, and what are you expecting will happen out of your intervention?
Okay. So what we have done is we have tried to establish what's called standing. Standing is that as a party, you have some sort of claim that's based on existing law or based on a harm that you're going to face. So we have made the argument that our standing as a community is that this is an infringement on our constitutional rights, specifically the First Amendment and free exercise, and that due process, equal protection under the 14th. And the reason we want to make what's called a third party intervention is that neither the petitioner, the state, nor the defendants, it's not in their interest. The state wants to make its case based on discrimination. So that's what they're going to be focused on. And they're, in fact, the violator here. Cisco is going to be interested in limiting its liability. So neither of those parties are going to address this very serious issue that's been raised. So that's it's a legal avenue that is available. Think of it as two neighbors are having a squabble, but maybe you live across the street and it's going to affect your property value. That's a very gross, example, but that's what I mean. That third party may not be directly involved, but they can make the argument. So that's what we've done.
Yeah. So that brings up a question. Are you aware of Cisco's defense in this matter? How are they defending themselves? And is there any scope here for coordination with Cisco to any extent?
I don't know about coordination. I mean, they are now on notice because once we filed our third party motion, we have to officially serve both parties. We have not yet heard anything. From what I understand from Cisco's internal blog, they are really resting on, or they keep going back on the arbitration clause. That they feel confident that they followed all of the procedures that they have in terms of ensuring that whatever complaint there was, that they did all the due diligence and made their determination, but that the employment contract requires arbitration. So they're basically trying to pull this out of court. Now, one of the things that the Cisco blog mentioned that we all should be aware of is that they did say, well, if the state of California were to add caste into their laws, well, then, of course, we'll create policies accordingly. And we've been in close touch with Hindus in UK, United Kingdom, who faced this similar issue. There had been a number of cases which they didn't intervene on. And then when it ultimately got to the legal process, the legislative process, is where they became activated. So those conversations with people on the ground there were really helpful in us realizing what's at, I mean, you realize what's at stake, but you can also kind of forecast what's next. And that's why it's important for us to intervene now.
So, and that if as a fallout of this case, no matter how this case ends, if as per Cisco's claim that that they will take appropriate measures if California introduces appropriate law pertaining to caste, right? And if that results in some kind of movement on the part of the state of California to really introduce legislation, that would be an extremely alarming step at that point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So now,
Absolutely.
yeah. So now, at this point, then would we as Hindus would we be considering suing the state of California itself for violating those constitutional principles that you laid out?
Yeah, it's certainly not off the table, even for this. But we'll take it one step at a time. Even if it gets to the legislative process, I think that looking at the experience of the United Kingdom, one, show the proof, right? How is this widespread? And if you're going to show the proof, it better be scientific, and things that can withstand statistical scrutiny. The second thing is define it, and you can't just add something without a definition and without standards. So I think that California's claim and our third party intervention, at the very least, is pointing out some of the challenges in just uncritically and unthoughtfully trying to legislate caste without any understanding of it.
Right. So I think
Angie,
yeah.
Just people have been asking about the replay. We're going to send out the webinar replay of this. I've included the links that Suhag ji has shared in the survey email that'll go out at 10:30. We're at 10:06 right now. We've got like 50 questions in the Q&A box. Very interesting. And as was mentioned, this is an ongoing conversation, but you will receive the replay of this webinar. I've also included links to get the replays of the other CAST webinars HUA has done. And so you will get that information. This is just one point of interaction between HUA, HAF, and you as participants. Thank you for being on. We still have over 200 people. Don't want to take up more time, but yes, you will get all of this information. You will get the links. You will get the replays. Just look for it in the email box. Thank you. Yeah. Continue on, Kayanji.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, as I noticed, as soon as I said, please put your question in the Q&A box, there are 50 questions at least.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick up, some of them are repetitive. So
okay.
So I'm picking up some questions, which I think are kind of take the conversation forward. So please allow me this role here to select the questions here. Okay. So now here's a very interesting question. Okay. How are you reshaping the narrative when appearances and existing narrative put you on an anti-plaintiff, pro-discrimination side? Nuance is so difficult in the world of sound bites. Okay, that's a great question. Okay,
yeah,
so, it's a great question, right? So just so that to kind of clarify what that question means is, see, this conversation is so polarized that as soon as you say it is incorrect to frame Hinduism as nothing more than caste-based discrimination, it invites the criticism that, oh, then you must be a propagator of caste-based discrimination and caste itself. Therefore, you are guilty of exactly the same accusation that we are making against Hinduism as a whole, right? So nuance is so difficult in a world of sound bites. Suhag,
I have a good sound bite actually on this, and it comes from our lawyer, who, by the way, is Episcopalian. We hired an outside firm, and he has a wealth of appellate and constitutional law experience, civil rights experience, et cetera, et cetera. He said, you don't need to discriminate to fight discrimination, right? And that's what the state has done. In order to fight one incident of alleged discrimination, they're looking to discriminate against 4 million of us.
A whole community, a
Yeah.
whole people. Which, by the way, I mean, just that's just in terms of the construction of the narrative around caste, that the whole genealogy of that can be traced back to the race theories and even caste theories within the European experience and narrative building. So there is some work to do for us in terms of framing our own narrative. That's very important. So here is another question. Why is the incorrect narrative of equality labs not being questioned? Why is the incorrect narrative of equality labs not being challenged? If it is being challenged, why is it not getting enough traction? What can we do about it? So that seems to be the. So
Yeah.
here is this person is saying, working in Silicon Valley, Ram Prasad is saying, working in Silicon Valley for 20 plus years and not seeing any such discrimination. It is very sad to see this wrong picture being painted, not by an arbitrary individual, not even by a hate group, but by the state of California itself. And that's what's extraordinary about this situation we're in.
Yeah, and I'm a native Californian as well. I was born and raised in California. So, even though I haven't lived there for almost over 20 years, it's disappointing. I have family, my sister, my parents, my brother, about 100 other family members all live in the Bay Area. So, I'm deeply concerned in terms of how does an equality labs get so much wind, into their sails. One is they have the benefit of a mainstream narrative, regardless of how false it is. They're riding that wave. The second thing is that they have successfully, and we've been seeing this, in terms of some of the Afro-Dalit narratives, they have successfully placed or utilized a lot of the Black Lives Matter language in trying to create what's really a false equivalency between what they see as their cause and what's going on in this country. So those two things. That the greatest irony, though, is that if they only knew that the thing that they're perpetuating, this idea of dark skin, the indigenous Dravidians and then the light-skinned Aryans, that all of that is rooted in a white supremacist narrative. I mean, look at the sheer irony of that. And their influence, many people, look, young people in our own communities, we're all, especially at that age, wired to want to change the world, to fight injustice. And they're susceptible to these narratives, which is why,
One more thing about that, see, something of this nature is going on where, where the racist and the racism within oneself, in one's own society, in community, and so on, is getting projected on to another, and the social justice, the what you're talking about, the vigor and the energy and the desire to fight social justice, instead of instead of directing it against the people who are perpetuating them, you transfer it on some other community,
right,
where where you don't have to deal with the real racism and the real discrimination, but now you create this entirely imagined narrative. Now it's with imaginary villains, and you go after it, which is what has been going on for nearly 200 years, 250 years now, really
well,
speaking.
and especially here in the United States, I mean, the efforts that this particular ecosystem of activism is essentially trying to make the equivalency between white supremacy and Hindu supremacy, right? We're a minority of color here. I don't know how much play that particular equation is getting in the mainstream, but this particular aspect, if you then take, oh, well, patriarchy is an outcome of that, or caste-based discrimination is an outcome of that people are able to latch onto. But then it's just going to be a matter of time before they end up at kind of like that apex, oh, white supremacy, Indian Hindu supremacy, equal sign, right? And it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's already happening, right? I mean, Hindus,
it is.
in academic circles, for example, the Hindu supremacy is being painted as the greatest threat to humankind that ever existed, and so on. So it's a lot of energy behind building this narrative. So here's an interesting question. This may be a sentinel case in that even if dismissed, it may tag some groups behind this filing. The publicity that I think it should say is important for the Hindu community to be aware of, which groups are going to end up getting promoted on account of this case, and are we watching this? How are we addressing this?
So we know there's other companies in the crosshairs. I mentioned early on in my presentation that there was a Google form making the rounds that have you faced caste-based discrimination in the workplace, and then even the petition that was out there, gently nudging people to put a Silicon Valley based zip code. So we are watching it closely. We have a good partnership with organizations based in California that are constantly giving us updates like, oh, hey, this Cisco, because look, the Cisco case has, because it was in the news so much, it has already begun having or impact on companies. We were helping a company, as someone, a Hindu behind the scenes, because in their company, someone wanted to bring up the caste conversation, and let's all, like HR, well-meaning HR professional said, let's talk about this. Well, what that basically did is that there were workers who probably have closer affiliation to kind of that Ambedkarite identity, started just spewing out anti-Hindu hatred, taking Ambedkar out of context and saying, well, this is a Hindu practice and Brahminical patriarchy, supremacy, blah, 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 the whole gamut. What that ended up doing is putting all the Indian workers on the back foot. They're afraid. They're like, well, now if I say something to the earlier question, am I going to look like I'm pro-discrimination?
Yeah.
Right? So how is that now a safe working environment where all people are respected and have the room to be themselves and to share, of their identity? So we're already seeing the effects, but we are keeping a close eye on where it might come up next. And it may not be limited to California.
Here is a very important question for you, Suhag. Are you sufficiently funded to take on this lawsuit?
Every cent helps. So, whatever people can help with is going to be helpful. I know how much we've spent so far. I know there's going to be more. It depends on if this filing, if we don't get the motion, what are the next steps? I know my strategy. I don't want to lay it out here. But I'll just say that whatever support people can give will be well spent.
Yeah, great. I think, I mean, as a more general case, please do get involved with this in this issue, because it pertains to all Hindus, not only in North America but around the world. And we're at an important time in history when the assault on facts especially when fanned by the possibilities of social media, uh, can take on very easily very dangerous narratives, with adverse consequences. So I think the Hindus as a whole, as a community, probably need to become more aware generally, and I'm sure the people who are participating today are far more aware than many who are not participating in this kind of conversations. And I think it would not be inappropriate to say there is an educational, you know, maybe a gap for our own community across the country, in
Yeah.
United States here. People not only are not aware, they need to be, become aware of these types of matters, but also understand the consequences for their own community in the future, and not even if not for themselves personally, for the future generations of Hindus living in North America. There's a whole lot to be done here in terms of taking better control, better ownership of the narrative around this
Hmm.
topic, where we are often and almost constantly on the defense when somebody else assaults the Hindu community on the basis of, whether it's a lawsuit or a school textbook or a college textbook or
Yeah.
any other form of narrative. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would just say that, if for people who want to just stay abreast of the latest, at least sign up for our newsletter at hinduamerican.org. You can, that way, at least if there are any action items or call to actions and things like that, they can be, made well aware of. I saw in the chat, is there a legal fund? There is a legal fund set up for this. And that also you can find on our website.
So is that pretty much easy to find, Suhag, or do you want to
Yeah,
put?
if they visit on the carousel, uh, I think where you see the California flag, if they click that story, what are the repercussions? That's another thing, is that, the people who are here have a higher level of awareness of these issues, but we need to get the word out to our friends who are not tapped into all of this, who might be self-conscious of their Hindu identity, because regardless of whether they consider themselves religious, or they say I'm spiritual but not religious, or I don't have time for all of that, the fact of the matter is, the way that California has defined Hinduism and Indians, it's going to affect you whether you like it or not. It's also going to affect you if you're Muslim. It's also going to affect you if you're Christian. And it affects all Americans, because once we say it's okay for the state to interfere in the inner workings of a religion, it's Hinduism today. It'll be Islam tomorrow. It'll be Christianity the next day, Jainism the next day, whatever it is. Uh, and that was the foresight of the forefathers of this country, to say, you know what, state needs to stay out of religion for religion to prosper.
Yeah. So here is a question. There's a book, recent best-selling book on caste.
Hmm.
It's come out, and can you please comment on how it impacts Hindus in America?
Yeah.
It is
Uh,
shaping the views of
boy.
many. Well,
Yeah.
here's another point: it's shaping the views of many in our family. Our family. So I would add, even in my family, the oftentimes it is very hard to engage the younger generation on a meaningful dialogue on this, because they get predisposed to the position that Hindus were the worst kinds of discriminators and have been so for 5,000 years. Thank God for Western civilization. We're improving ourselves as a human beings.
Yeah, both of those things. So the book is definitely a challenge, because it definitely perpetuates this predominant narrative. Oprah endorsing it didn't help matters. So, this happened in June, and I think Oprah recommended the book shortly thereafter, and we were just like, no, this cannot be happening. I know that there are a number of kind of Hindu influencers and thinkers, Aditi Banerjee, for one, Indu Vishwanathan's another individual who have commented on that. I'm hoping that they're open to writing book reviews, or anyone who has a talent for writing, write a book review on that, right? That sort of content is really helpful. One, to share with young people, so that they understand, it's very easy. It's easier to jump on the bandwagon,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And so, having people who have read it put a thoughtful book review together. These days you just have to stick something up on Medium, and people will read it. And I think it's important that more people read it. In terms of the conversation that parents need to have with their kids, that's something I personally want to work on, because in my own family, I don't know. I mean, with my own kids, it's easy because they've been eating, drinking, breathing, Hindu advocacy. I think we started HAF and I was still pregnant with our second young one, who's now 18. But having that conversation with our kids, who are more influenced by pop culture, more influenced by the social justice causes that are good ones, but then this kind of perverted application occurs for our own tradition and history. I want to personally figure out some sort of way to provide a guide of some sort or something to empower parents to have those difficult conversations with their kids. How to go about doing that? We're working with a couple of younger folks to see where do we start? What would be convincing to you? Because, I mean, if you have a teenager, pretty much everything you say is wrong. So let's get past that bar, and how do we really connect with them? And so I think it's important to actually get young people who are, embedded in the community and embedded in the tradition to actually lead the way.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take. We're going to end in a couple, 2-3 minutes. Okay, I'm going to take two more questions maybe.
Okay.
Do you have an understanding of as to why the case was moved from federal court back to the state of California?
Yeah, I think that California maybe thought they had a better chance in state court, especially because California is known to have some activist judges. Now, whether this particular judge is activist or not, I don't know, but that is kind of a generally held view.
Yeah. Okay, here's another very interesting question. You said saying every penny helps was good, but it may not generate sizable contributions. Can you give us some idea of the costs involved in fighting this litigation, and so people can contribute?
Yeah.
More
So,
sizable.
this is not over, but I'll just give a similar example of California. When we sued the state of California for textbooks, the cost of that, just the legal fees alone, that's not counting staff time, was something like $150,000 or $200,000. That was, just lawyer fees. That didn't count the amount of staff time that went into that. So suing is not well, here it's a motion to intervene, but legal action is not cheap. So
Right.
those are the types of numbers we're looking at for just something as simple as textbooks. So I imagine that this will get into that number as well.
Right. So I think see, for the Hindu community to take up meaningful lawsuits and start to establish certain precedents in terms of legal judgments and so on is going to be very important. And therefore, this is an important case, and the community should really get behind this particular case. Now, there's a general question on the narrative. How are we supposed to respond when somebody challenges on caste? I saw that a couple of different places. Now, Suhag, I'll let you answer it, but I think there is a case to be made for some simplistic, easy to consume, like a pamphlet or a booklet on how do we talk about the subject of caste, and have people who are interested really get acquainted with this. And I think from a Hindu University of America, we would be very keenly interested in putting together a course on this subject, which covers all the major topics, the history and the narrative, how it got constructed, what we are stuck with, how to respond, what to talk about, how to understand the phenomenon, and so on. So your turn.
That's $1 million question.
$1 million question. No, it's not a $200,000 question. It's a
I know
million.
it's the $200,000. So I, and here I am, I'm going to like stumble over words. I think that first and foremost, there's several. I don't think there's going to be a single answer to this. One is to acknowledge that discrimination happens. We don't have to specify the basis because we don't necessarily know what the basis is. So we can say, yes, prejudice and discrimination exist in our communities, and and they're a violation of our core teachings. And our core teachings tell us that we shouldn't do that, right? That's kind of a evasive way, but at the same time, an honest way of addressing this. Because, and in some sense, I think that we have to first start there, only because if you start,
in other words, right, what you're saying is, the let's make a distinction between an aberration and the norm.
Yeah.
Right. So here, aberrant behavior exists in all societies. You don't take the statistics around crimes in a particular society, in a city, etc., and generalize it and say all people in this community exhibit this kind of behavior potentially, meaning even if they are not criminals, they have not committed any crimes, they are potential criminals by definition, because hey, look at all these instances where crimes have been committed by this community, right? So the aberration and the norm, that's what you are suggesting, that we should first and foremost make a distinction, right?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, and also because, see, the first accusation, if the first place I start is, well, there's no such thing as caste, or what is caste? Like if I start there, then to that earlier question, right, that makes every single one of us uncomfortable is, well, then are you justifying the discrimination, right? So yes, you cannot take individual instances and use that as the measure for an entire community, right? There are bad apples. But to me, the thing that I keep going back to, and the reason why you're doing what you do, the reason I do what I do, is we see tremendous transformative value in Hindu teachings. This idea that we are interconnected to one another. It goes beyond treat your neighbor as you would want to treat, have them treat you. We're talking about not just your neighbor, but this chair, the birds, I mean, everything. And if we see discrimination occurring in our communities, we have that. If we see people painting us in something that's other than that, we have that to say, no, we are wrong. This is who we are. And that's what we have to keep going back to. That's what will give us strength to fight against the stereotypes. It also gives us the content to fight against the stereotypes. And it gives us a solution to remedy any ills that are occurring in our community.
All right. Wonderful. Great. So I think certainly this is not the last conversation we're going to have on this subject. That is for sure. And we are in the middle of an ongoing dialogue on the subject of Varna, Jati on the one hand, and caste, race and caste on the other hand. And it's important to construct them as two distinct phenomena. There is the Hindu phenomenon, there's the Western narrative about the Hindu phenomenon. So I want to thank everybody who participated and asked questions and passed, offered your perspectives and comments. I just want to acknowledge that we may not have gotten to all the questions, but for paucity of time, we'll pick up this thread in a future discussion soon. So with that, I'd like to say thank you all, and Suhag, thank you so much for.
Thank you for having me. Well, maybe what you could do is, if you want to share the questions with me, I'm happy to, if we can kind of collate them, if they're thematic, if there's answers, I can try to, provide them in writing.
Yeah, terrific, great.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Namaste, everybody. Namaste. Thank you.